and time again. Joining me now, the chair of the Ohio Democratic Party, Elizabeth Walters. Elizabeth, it's a pleasure to have you on the show this morning. We all know Ohio is reliably red, voting for Trump by more than 8 points in the last 2 presidential elections. So why do you think issue 1 transcended party lines?
Well, I think that Ohio voters what we're seeing is Ohio voters are supportive of restoring Roe in Ohio. And while Trump did win the state twice, we also know that there are other trends at play in Ohio that show that even every state in the Midwest, every state in the country is worth fighting for, especially when our democracy is at stake. And that's what Ohio voters did on Tuesday. They showed up and said, we won't go back. We are going to protect our democracy. We are going to fight to enshrine abortion rights in our state constitution. So while on Tuesday we won an important battle, on November we are going to be ground zero for abortion rights in this country.
You know, Elizabeth, let's talk about some of these numbers still, because mail-in and early voting surpassed 2022 primary voting with almost 700,000 votes before Election Day this past week. What was the strategy that was implemented by Democrats in Ohio to galvanize that type of turnout?
This was good old-fashioned grassroots organizing and empowering folks across the state to talk to their friends, families, and neighbors about what was really on the ballot here. As you said, Frank LaRose, I never say thank you to him, but he made it clear. He said this was 100% about abortion. And so our volunteers, our leaders, folks all over the state, they got to work immediately when this passed out of the State House in May. And in 80 days, we did incredible work to make sure voters knew what was at stake on Tuesday and how to cast their vote either early in person or on Election Day at the polls. And as you noted, the turnout was astounding. We reached 77% of the November general election turnout. And I think Republicans took a bad bet, thinking that Ohioans were going to be tuned out, weren't going to pay attention, we're going to be busy with coaching Little League or getting ready to go back to school. But when it comes to democracy, when it comes to restoring Roe, voters pay attention no matter what's going on in their life.
And listen, this August vote was not done in a vacuum. We've also seen a pattern of abortion rights on the ballot, prompting huge voter turnouts across the country. But still focusing on Ohio, there's that big Senate race that's coming up next year as Senator Sherrod Brown faces re-election. Interestingly, and you mentioned Frank LaRose, one of his biggest opponents is Secretary of State Frank LaRose, who was the most vocal advocate for the loss or the losing issue 1. So do you think this issue 1 outcome, Elizabeth, will heavily impact that Senate race as well as the 2024 presidential election next year?
I think issue 1 will heavily impact the Republican primary for the Senate race in 2024. Ohio voters have a choice here, and we'll have a choice next November about the best senator in the country who has worked harder than anyone for workers, for good-paying jobs, for our freedoms in Ohio, in Sherrod Brown. And in contrast, what we see is a group of out-of-touch politicians on the Republican side who embrace out-of-touch policies, who embrace extreme positions on abortion. Every single one of those Republicans running, including Frank LaRose, will support a national abortion ban. And so what this race does on Tuesday, what this race will do in November is clarify voters' choices in 2024. And if folks want to learn how to get involved and join us in this work in November and stay with us through 24, they can go to ohiodems.org to learn more about how they can get engaged in all this work.
And, you know, Elizabeth, the fight is not just at the ballot boxes. It's actually happening in court. I have my hands fresh off the presses of a decision that was reached by the Ohio Supreme Court just yesterday on August 11th. There was a challenge to the petition that was signed by hundreds of thousands of voters in Ohio to make sure that in November, the ability to enshrine access to abortion occurs for that vote in November. The Supreme Court saying the challenge has been dismissed. The petition is completely valid on its face. My question for you is this. In the wake of radical Republican state legislatures like in Ohio, abortion rights supporters are increasingly turning to ballot measures, as you have in your own state. Efforts are underway in Arizona, Florida, Missouri, Nevada, and South Dakota to get a measure like yours on the 2024 ballot. At a minimum, do you think this ballot measure strategy is sufficient in a post-Dobbs landscape?
I think the answer to that is all of the above. We have to protect our rights and our freedoms, from our democracy access all the way to the abortion rights to voting rights. All of these fights are intertwined. But most importantly, I think what we see from Republicans is there's nothing they won't stoop to force their extreme policies on Ohioans, on voters across the country. We know that the majority of Ohioans support abortion access. We know that a majority of Ohioans support restoring Roe, and believe that these same out-of-touch politicians who tried to strip us of our voice at the ballot box also do not belong in the doctor's office making decisions for Ohio women. And so at the end of the day, we take these fights one at a time as they come. But we know that, the tried and true strategy of the Ohio Republican Party is that if you can't win a fair fight, they try to change the rules. And on Tuesday, Ohioans showed them they've had enough, and they said, we won't go back, and we are going to stand firm for abortion rights in Ohio and continue this work into November.
Ohio Democratic Party Chair Elizabeth Walters, I thank you for joining my show this morning.